then we'll get this discussion going a little bit more as a community. And yeah, if you need a reminder, it's posted out there as well. Okay, third thing on my list, bathrooms, right outside down the hallway here. And this is a housekeeping item too that applies both at the local level, like we may need those later tonight, but if you want to think at that global level as well, at the global level, you can go to the washroom pretty much anywhere you want, but you should understand that that has implications for everyone else that we have to live with and for the world around us as well. We should be thinking in those kind of terms. So act accordingly. Fourth, there are exits. Okay, so these exits, there are two at the back, there's one at the front, and these are meant to be used in an emergency. Okay, so that's the local level. At the global level, well, there really are no exits. Don't be distracted by billionaires who are going to tell you that we can get off this planet. We are all living here. And also, our world is on fire. Naomi Klein will tell you that. We're going to talk about this a little bit as we go. And so we can't leave, and we have to face up to that and learn how to deal with it. So that's the global level of exits from this room. Okay, those are the housekeeping notes, and I think we're ready to open up the discussion. So to do that, I'm very pleased to introduce David Suzuki, who I think has joined us magically online. You know David Suzuki, but Dr. Suzuki is a grandfather, a scientist, a former host of CBC's The Nature of Things, and emeritus professor from the University of British Columbia. Through radio, television, and over 55 books, he has communicated humanity's collective impact on the natural world, an impact that now threatens the future of human life. Along with his many accolades, Dr. Suzuki has been conferred with over 30 honorary degrees from universities in Canada, the United States, and Australia. Dr. Suzuki has been honored with adoptions and names from 8 Indigenous nations in Canada and Australia. So I think for decades we have been hearing what Dr. Suzuki has said, but I don't know if we've been listening very closely. And so this evening we have an opportunity to pay very close attention for the next 40 minutes to an hour and a half or so. And so Dr. Suzuki, we are listening right now, and I invite you to begin your address. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm speaking to you from the traditional occupied land of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people who cared for these lands and waters for thousands of years. Thank you so much for inviting me to share a few ideas with you today. I can see from what you've just said that this will continue on in a program of other people having this conversation in the coming months and years. Good for you. First, full disclosure, though, I don't speak on behalf of any political party, corporation, or organization. I have no hidden agenda. I speak to you as a grandfather and an elder. This is the most critical time in my life because as an elder, I don't have to kiss anyone's behind or lie in order to get a job, a raise, or a promotion. As an elder, I'm not driven by a need for more fame or power or money. I can speak the truth from my heart for the sake of my grandchildren and their future. And if what I say offends people, it's not my problem. Ever since human beings sat around fires gazing at the heavens, we've wondered, who are we? How did we get here? Why are we here and where are we going? And the creation stories have embodied our attempts to answer these questions. Today, science provides creation stories that go back beyond human memory, but are not meant in any way to undermine the rich insights that are part of the creation stories of our cultures. When you autopsy the brains, the sense organs, and neurons of people from around the world, you can't tell which ones are Europeans, Africans, or Asians, because we're all built on the same plan. We all belong to the same species. Yet the way we sense and respond to the world around us is profoundly influenced by gender, ethnicity, religion, culture, language, socioeconomic status, and individual experiences. In other words, what our sense organs tell us is edited through filters that are shaped by the values and beliefs we grew up with. Ask a man and a woman about sex, about love, or family. Ask a Catholic and a Protestant in Northern Ireland about the Troubles. Ask Palestinians and Israelis about Gaza. Ask Zelensky, Putin, and Trump about Ukraine. You would think they come from different planets. Years ago, I visited a village in the Andes Mountains of Peru with Wade Davis, and there I learned that the children are taught that mountain is an Apu, which means God in their language. And as long as that Apu casts its shadow on the village, it will determine the fate of everyone in that village. Wade remarked, imagine how those kids treat that mountain when they grow up, compared to kids in Trail, British Columbia, who are told all their lives, those mountains must be full of gold, silver, and copper, and maybe even lithium. The way we see the world is shaped by many different factors, and how we see that world determines the way we will treat it. How can we find a way for everyone to act together the way we do in science fiction films when Earth is invaded by aliens from another galaxy? You know, right away, the Russian president's calling the American president's calling the Chinese president. We're acting together because that's what's needed now to work on climate change and biodiversity loss. I believe that science offers rock-solid information that all of humanity could and must agree upon. You see, science is practiced around the world by a set of rules for everyone. Now, science isn't always right. Remember, most scientists in the beginning were white upper-class males, and that influenced the kinds of questions asked, how experiments were designed, and the results interpreted. But science is self-correcting. When others say, hey, wait a minute now, we need women to ask questions. We need people who are indigenous. When people try to reproduce the results that we already have, science corrects itself. So science provides the most credible information, free of personal or cultural values, on the state of the world. I'm a biologist, and that shapes the way I see the world and all life on it. The evidence that life arose 3.9 billion years ago, I think, is quite convincing. Before there was life on Earth, it took hundreds of millions of years for atoms and simple molecules to accumulate in the water. And once they were together, they could be hooked together into bigger forms. We call them macromolecules of proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And millions of protocells, early models of cells, arose when a lipid membrane created an inside separate from the outside. So materials now could be concentrated in those cells, and the cells would grow. But as quickly as they arose, collected materials, and grew, they popped, releasing their contents that the other protocells could gobble up. So the earliest cells set the pattern that life feeds on the carcasses of other life. But it took hundreds of millions of years for those early primitive cells to refine the apparatus of metabolism, storage of information, and reproduction until one cell triumphed. And all of life since then, plant, animal, and microbial, has descended from that one original cell. For more than 3 billion years after life arose, life was invisible because it was all single-celled microbes. And those single-celled animals, organisms were refining how they could feed, how they could move, how they could reproduce, how they could keep from being eaten, and always on the hunt for energy. Energy was hard to get. They had to cozy up to volcanoes or lava fields or hot springs, and they could release energy by if they could break a chemical bond. It was really tough. Energy was a tough thing for early life forms. 1 billion years after life arose, a huge biological breakthrough occurred. Photosynthesis, the capture of the sun's energy, which became the energy source for all life. But even after life tapped into sunlight, it took almost 2 billion more years for multicellularity, that is, animals and plants made of more than just one cell, to take place. It's only been the last 600 million years that we've had all the creatures that you and I can see with the naked eye. The evolution of life is a magnificent story that only science could attempt to provide answers that we can all accept. Of course, what I've just said is just a skeleton of the story. And now we have to flesh out that skeleton. We know that nature has had all the time in the world to evolve as it has. Since life arose 3.94 billion years ago, the sun is 30% warmer. The atmosphere went from no oxygen to 20% oxygen after photosynthesis. Tectonic plates have pulled apart, moved and smashed together. Mountains have risen up and worn down. Oceans have filled and emptied. Warm periods have been punctuated by ice ages. The magnetic poles have reversed and re-reversed. And all the while, life has survived and flourished. How? Two factors have been very critical: diversity and extinction. We have learned that genetic diversity within a species, we call it genetic polymorphism, that diversity within ecosystem, diversity of species within ecosystems, and diversity of ecosystems across the planet provide options as environmental conditions change. Diversity provides those options, and humans have added another level of diversity, which is culture. Culture has enabled us to survive in many diverse environments, from the Arctic to the tropics to mountains to wetlands. Diversity has been the key to survival over time. Of all species that have ever existed since life arose, 99.99% are now extinct, because extinction is also necessary for evolution to take place. There have been 5 episodes of mass extinction in the past, when up to 95% of species in the fossil record suddenly disappear. When I say suddenly, that's suddenly in geological time. That's how much, just a thin layer, but it may be up to 2 million years. Geologically, that's sudden. Up to 95% of species disappear. In 2019, the United Nations released the most shocking report of a 6th mass extinction underway. Millions of species that were on this planet when I was born in 1936 are now extinct, and another 1 million species are poised to become extinct right now. Earth is undergoing another mass extinction, and we know the cause: us. We are the only species with the intelligence to foresee our own demise as a species. The tragedy is that we know, as a top predator, We are threatening our own survival, and we know how to avoid the current threat. And it is not, as your speaker said, by going to Mars, but we seem unable to take the steps that are needed. How on earth did we ever get to this point? Scientists today can take DNA, the genetic material, and compare it between different groups of people. We know, for example, the Koreans were related to the Chinese. So we can go back and say, when did they separate? And so we go back in time and we can find how long ago and when it was that they actually separated. And when you keep doing that, how do the Asians, when did we separate from this other group? And you can go back and all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. That's where we were born as a brand new species 200,000 years ago. I keep waiting for the Ku Klux Klan to invite me to speak so I can tell them we're all Africans. What the hell is your problem? Try to imagine what Africa was like when we appeared as a species. The savannas were filled with animals and vegetation far greater in diversity and abundance than anything on the Serengeti today. And here and there, 200,000 years ago, you might see clusters of 3, 4, or 5 of these hairless, two-legged apes. That was us. Seen in that context, we weren't very impressive. There weren't many of us. We weren't big. We weren't fast or strong. We weren't armed with fangs or claws or protected by shells or fur or even thick skin, although some of our politicians seem to have thick skin. We didn't have acute senses of smell, hearing, or vision. I mean, you got to ask, what the hell did we have going for us? I'm sure when we walked by 200,000 years ago, other species didn't hug their kids and say, shh, don't get them upset. They're going to take over the planet someday. We were not that impressive. But our survival advantage, and we had one, was hidden. It was 1.5 kilograms organ buried deep in our skulls, the human brain. That brain was observant. It was curious. It was inventive, and it remembered qualities that more than compensated for our lack of physical or sensory ability. We learn from our observations as well as our failures and successes, and we learn to use symbols. A handprint on a cave wall, a circle drawn on the ground, a stick propped on a rock pointing in the direction someone went, a pile of stones, abstract symbols, representations of something real that we could communicate through. And we realized we could affect the future by what we do in the present. At first, it was simple. You know, you're walking along a trail and it branches. And you go, hey, I remember Dad went to the right and he damn near got killed by a saber-toothed tiger. But Mom went left, and she found a big patch of berries. So let's go left. Foresight, the ability to look ahead, recognize dangers and opportunities, and deliberately choose to avoid the dangers and exploit the opportunities, was a critical and unique part of our success as a species. And it's enshrined in many of the stories we tell ourselves. In the Bible, Joseph, the boy with a coat of many colors, had the ability to read dreams, and he told the Pharaoh, get the people to store grain. There is a prolonged famine coming. And the Pharaoh trusted him, and the people stored their grain, and they survived years of drought. Noah, a carpenter, was told, build an ark because earth will be covered with water. He did and survived the great flood. Indigenous cultures speak of thinking back over 7 generations of the ancestors from whom they received the earth, and then ahead on 7 generations yet to come. Foresight, the ability to look ahead, has been the key to our survival as a species. Now, for 40 to 50,000 years, our home was the savannas of Africa. But then some of us began to move. And scientists don't know why. Perhaps our numbers had grown by then so that there were enough people to have tribal wars over territory. Perhaps we depleted certain plants or animals. I like to think it was teenagers looking for action. You know, back then, humans we know bred with Neanderthal people, a different group of animals. Maybe word got back that there were some good-looking Neanderthals in the other side of a desert or over this mountain, and they weren't as smart as we are. So anyway, whatever the reason, we began to move on foot, carrying everything we owned, eventually crossing the entire continent and even oceans. An amazing story. But wherever we moved, we were an invasive species. We didn't know anything about these new lands. If there were suddenly, oh, look at those birds, they don't even have wings. Or those slow-moving sloths, big animals, and they're yummy to eat. We took them. Even with simple tools like spears, digging sticks, and clubs, we were a deadly predator. Scientists find that a wave of extinction follows us as we moved across the planet. Even back then, we were a very effective predator. For 95% of our existence as a species, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers, following animals on their migrations, searching for plants through the seasons. It blows my mind to think that all of our distant ancestors had to use their wits to find food every day. And they didn't even have fur to keep them warm at night. It's no wonder we evolved in Africa, where nature was so plentiful and climate was so moderate. Even a furless ape like us could flourish there. We've always understood in those conditions that we are one small strand in a web of relationships with all other animals and plants, and with air, water, soil, and sunlight. And in a web, what happens to one strand in a web reverberates throughout the entire web. In that web, each species does what it evolved to do: survive and get their species genes onto another generations. That's what every species is about. Human intelligence adds another factor to this web: responsibility. We are the only ones that know that when we act in some deliberate way, there are consequences. And so we must do everything we can to protect the integrity of that web, or what we call nature. We've understood that responsibility. My Indigenous friends say we have to act in a good way to ensure that. And you, as architects and builders, I assume, you've got to think about every aspect of your activity and what that effect on the web is. And it's enormous. The observations and lessons learned from the mistakes and successes over time became the foundation, the distillate of Indigenous knowledge in every territory. And that knowledge was the blueprint for survival that was passed on to each generation from their elders. And because they remembered and passed those hard-won lessons on through language, human cultural evolution sped up thousands of times faster than biological evolution. So our change has been very, very rapid compared to any other species, but it's all been cultural, not biological. We've hardly changed from what we were 200,000 years ago. As communities grew, 10,000 years ago, the last 5% of our existence, agriculture, changed the course of human existence and made modern civilization possible. Domestication of plants and animals enabled people to settle in place, to build permanent structures, to increase population and diversity and diversify the roles that people played. As communities grew, people engaged in other activities than farming, carpentry, plumbing, teaching, and I'm sure early on politics. Agriculture made kings and kingdoms possible and was the foundation of empires that rose and fell. Farmers know that weather, climate, and the seasons are critical factors affecting our survival. Farmers know that snow in the winter means moisture in the soil in the summer, that certain plants will take nitrogen from the air and fix it as fertilizer in the soil. Farmers know that insects are critical for pollination of flowering plants. Farmers know we remain embedded in and utterly dependent on nature. But a great shift in the way that we saw our place in nature began in Europe with the Renaissance in the 14 and 1500s. Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were part of that incredible flowering of art and thought. And the philosopher René Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. You all know Latin, of course. I think, therefore I am. And there, just by saying that, he was elevating the mind, our survival attribute. The mind now became everything, the very definition of who we are. And Francis Bacon said, scientia, science, knowledge, scientia potestas est, knowledge is power. Thus recognizing that the brain provides insights that empower people to control their surroundings. And Isaac Newton, the great mathematician of the Renaissance, who calculated the movement of the heavenly bodies, declared the universe behaves like a clockwork mechanism. And if it's a mechanical thing, then eventually, if we look at the cogs, the springs, the wheels, understand the parts, we can eventually fit them back together again and understand the whole. That is the basis of what is called reductionism. Don't try to explain everything, look at the parts, and eventually we'll fit them back together. Unfortunately, modern physics has shown that it doesn't work, because even at the most elementary level of atoms and subatomic particles, there is uncertainty. If you want to measure the two critical properties at the subatomic level, that's velocity or movement and mass, weight. You can't measure movement and weight at the same time together. You have to pin one down so you can measure the other. So even at the most elementary level, there is uncertainty. You don't know with absolute certainty. And then biologists discovered when you put parts together, you study that, when you put them together, there are new properties that emerge that can't be predicted from studying the basic parts. They're called emergent properties. They result from the synergy between the parts. Unfortunately, reductionism, though, continues to be the dominant assumption in biology today, especially in an area like mine of genetics. So by elevating the mind above the body, outside now of the web of life, Europeans no longer felt enmeshed with the rest of nature. They thought it's more like a pyramid where we're at the top and everything down below is for us. And once they developed wind power sailboats that could propel ocean boats over vast distances, and then they found that they could navigate by the stars, then that meant they could go long distances but get back home. The age of exploration by Europeans, white men, began. But exploration wasn't out of curiosity. It was a drive to find resources. And everywhere those explorers went, they found lands already inhabited by people, people of color who looked different. They had different languages and clothing and body adornment and foods and religions and cultures. Even though they had survived for tens of thousands of years in Africa, North and South America, Australia, and Asia, they were considered by the explorers primitive, even subhuman, and they were often called savages. The assumed superiority of European colonizers was the justification for their genocidal policies to suppress or eliminate indigenous cultures and people. The colonizers had no interest in the people who were there, how they got there, or how they had lived in place for so long. They were interested in the resources, from gold and silver to timber, fish, furs, or the land itself. 200 years ago, the Industrial Revolution took root. Every biological organism must live within boundaries that are imposed by the natural world, by nature. Humans are terrestrial, air-breathing mammals. But with machines, we seem to have escaped biological limits. Machines could work tirelessly at repetitive tasks without getting bored or take a lunch or pee breaks. They didn't get sick. They didn't fall in love and lose 50 IQ points. They could move enormous weights. With machines, we could gouge into the earth, dam rivers to create lakes, travel vast distances rapidly. Of course, over the past century, technological innovation has ramped up our ability to escape limits. We can fly. We can fly faster than the speed of sound. We can live underwater. We can puncture Earth's crust. We can liberate energy by smashing atoms. We can communicate instantly around the planet. We can escape gravity and live in space. At the very time that our technology really took off, so did population. And humanity moved from rural village communities built around agriculture to big cities. In 1900, there were less than 10 million people in Canada, and most Canadians lived in small villages and towns. Yet only 100 years later, 85% of Canadians and a majority of people in the developing world had moved into big cities. It was an astounding shift because in a city, our highest priority is our job because we need money to buy what we want. So the economy becomes our highest priority. I visited an Indigenous community at Fort Rupert on Vancouver Island. And there, a First Nations elder told me during the 1930s, his people didn't even know there was a Great Depression on because the forest was still intact and the ocean was still abundant. That was all they needed. In cities, though, we think nature is away from us, out there, protected, we hope, in wilderness areas and parks. I believe our education system has fundamentally failed to teach us what matters most in our lives. I see that every time I speak to young children. I ask them, what do they think is the most important thing that they need? And of course, they sing my bicycle, my computer, my cell phone, mom and dad, a pet, and so on. They're kids. So then I tell them, okay, I want to show you something else. Take a deep breath. Now hold it for 5 minutes. I'll keep on talking, but you don't take another breath. And kids are so trusting that I've told them what to do. So they puff up and they try, but within 20 seconds, you can see most of them are going, well, they're turning pink. And of course, by 30 seconds, most have taken a breath. So I tell them, see, we need air every minute of our lives. If we don't have air for 3 or 4 minutes, we're dead. If we pollute the air, we get sick. We can't even commit suicide by saying, I'm not going to take another breath. I want to die. Because our bodies will not let us commit suicide. So then I say, now I want you to think about that precious breath of air. Think about it as it goes up your nose. Grandpa's nose is filled with hairs. Those hairs are to filter any large particles in the air. And then as it passes up the nasal passage, it gets warmed and moisturized, goes down our bronchus, divides into our lungs, which are filled by little tiny capsules called alveoli. Singular is alveolus. The alveoli, there are millions of alveoli in our lungs. If you flattened them out in 2 dimensions, the alveoli would cover a tennis court because we need all of that surface area to come into contact with the air. When that air hits our alveoli, the 3-layered membrane in each alveolus is called a surfactant. It sticks to the air. Carbon dioxide in our bodies rushes out, and oxygen and whatever is in that air is picked up by red blood cells. And with each beat of our hearts, that oxygen and whatever else is pumped to every part of our bodies. And when we breathe out, we don't exhale all of the air. Our lungs would collapse. About half of the air stays in our lungs. Well, what does that mean? You can't draw a line and say the air ends here and I begin there. There is no line. It's in us, it's stuck to our surfactant, and it's circulating through our bodies. And the air that does come out of my nose goes straight up the people standing next to me, or the trees, or the animals. We're all embedded in a matrix of air that embeds all of us together, and it's in us. We are air. And whatever we do to the air, we do to ourselves. That's why it's so irresponsible when people say, I don't want the freedom to make a decision about wearing a mask. Wait a minute now. Don't you have a responsibility? What's coming out of your nose is going straight up the nose of everyone around. So if you can put a mask on and reduce the chances of sharing your COVID with someone else, don't you think you ought to be doing that? We should think about that. We are air. Whatever we do to the air, we do to ourselves. I wanted to, when we started my foundation, I wanted to make a big poster of a baby sitting on a table with a gas mask on and the pipe of the mask hooked up to the exhaust of a car. And people were just horrified. They said, that's awful. That's a terrible, terrible picture. But it's basically what we're doing every time a car engine goes or a factory smokestack. All that is being poured out, and the most sensitive lungs in people are in babies. You might as well pump it right straight in from a car or a factory. Clean air is not made by human factories or human activity. It is a sacred gift we receive from nature. And in receiving that gift, seems to me we have a responsibility for how we affect that air. Because whatever we do to that air, we're doing to ourselves as well. We are all part of the hydrologic cycle. Water covers 70% of the planet. Water evaporates, condenses into clouds that blow across the sky, then rains back to Earth. Water cartwheels around the planet. We drink it and it inflates our cells. It's an essential part of the chemical metabolism taking place in our bodies. It transfers messages between cells. It cools us when we sweat. We are 60 to 70% water by weight. We're just a big blob of water with enough thickener added. We don't dribble away on the floor. But of course, our bodies leak water, right? Water comes out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch, and we lose water. So if we don't have water for 4 to 6 days, we die. If we have to drink polluted water, we sicken. Pure water isn't created by factories. We have to build factories to filter the water, but pure water is created out of the activity of trees and plants in the soil and soil fungi and microorganisms. Pure water is a sacred gift from nature. Like all animals, we need food, and all of the food that we need was once alive. We take the carcasses of plants and animals, tear them apart in our mouths, and construct our bodies from them. Yet we spread toxins onto and into the plants and animals we eat. All of our food ultimately comes from the soil, which is compost mixed with sand and gravel. So, as you'll remember from the movie Martian, when Matt Damon was stranded on Mars, he had a year's worth of potatoes, but he had to wait for 4 years to be rescued. Lots of sand and dust and gravel and clay around, but no soil. He had to dig a hole in the sand and put poop into it in order to grow his potatoes, because life creates the soil. And every bit of the energy in our bodies that we need to move and grow and play and reproduce and work is sunlight captured by plants and stored in energetic molecules, so that when we need that energy to do anything, we burn those molecules, which we get by eating plants or animals that eat the plants, and we release the sun's energy back out. And all of the energy we deliberately release by burning fuels, wood, dung, peat, coal, oil, gas, that's all sunlight captured by plants. Those are the basic elements that make our lives and all life on Earth possible. Earth, air, fire, sunlight, water. Earth, air, fire, and water, generously cleansed and replenished by the web of all other living things. That should be the basic foundation of our education that should be starting right at the home. Today, we no longer feel constrained by natural laws or planetary boundaries. So foresight becomes even more important. Scientists, armed with supercomputers, have been warning us for decades that we have to pay attention to the world as biological creatures with biological needs. In 1992, 1,600 top scientists from 70 countries in the world, including more than half of all Nobel Prize winners in science alive at that time, signed a remarkable document called World Scientists' Warning to Humanity. And it began, and I quote, "Human beings in the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent." End of quote. It then listed the areas we are colliding with: the atmosphere, water, fresh water, oceans, soil, forests, species loss, and population. And then they listed what had to be done starting immediately. This is 1992. 1, bring environmentally damaging activities under control and protect the integrity of Earth's systems. And that means virtually every activity we undergo, whether it's building, whether it's logging, mining, whether it's fossil fuels. Every human activity must think about our damaging activities and bring it under control. 2, manage crucial resources. Those are unsustainable, that is, things like minerals, mining. Manage crucial resources more effectively. 3, stabilize population. 4, reduce and eventually eliminate poverty. And 5, ensure sexual equality and guarantee women control over their own reproductive decisions. There it was, a call to action and a prescription of what had to be focused on immediately. Then the words grow even more grim. No more than 1 or a few decades remain before the chance to avert the threats will be lost and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. End of quote. That was it. Scientists were acting in the best tradition of our species, looking ahead, seeing the dangers, and pointing to the opportunities. Bill Rees defined the ecological footprint, the amount of the world's renewable resources we use up every year. And as long as we use less every year than the world renews, that is sustainable. In 1970, when the first Environment Day was held, Rees found that we had used up a year's worth of renewables. That's fish and trees and birds and soil and atmosphere by December 25th. In other words, by Christmas Day, we were now, after that, for the next 7 days till New Year's, using up our biological capital, our principal. By 2020, the date that we had used up all of Earth's renewable resources was in the middle of August. We are using up the rightful legacy of future generations. We are using up our biological capital rather than living on the biological interest. Ron Milo, a scientist in Israel, has been looking at the weight of all living things. You know, as a predator, we are eating plants and animals, and any predator must, if you're a tiger, you want to be sure there are a lot more of your prey than there are tigers. Otherwise, you're going to use up your prey. Even the blue whale, the biggest animal on the planet, which only eats plankton, I mean, there's got to be a lot of plankton in order to support blue whales. What Milo estimated was the weight of all wild terrestrial mammals. Those are the elephants and giraffes and mice and rabbits and moose, rabbits. It comes to 22 million tons. Now you might think, whoa, that's a lot. Well, the weight of all domesticated terrestrial mammals, so 22 million tons is all the wild mammals, the weight of all the domesticated mammals, the cattle, the horses, the pigs, the dogs, etc., that we're raising, add up to 630 million tons, and the weight of all humans alone is 390 million tons. The wild animals on the planet only weigh 22 million. When you add up us and all the animals that we're raising for us, Johan Rockström has defined 9 planetary boundaries: atmospheric carbon, marine pH, the nitrogen cycle, fresh water, and so on, within which all life must remain within those boundaries that are set by nature. Of the 9 boundaries, we have now passed 7. If we pass even one, we should be pooping our pants. We have passed 7 of the 9 boundaries, and we haven't responded at all to the warnings that have come from our top scientists. So in 2017, more than 16,000 scientists published World Scientists Warning to Humanity, a Second Notice. The cries for urgent action. The problems pointed out in the first scientist warning have only worsened. We've only pulled back from the danger zone in one area, and that's the ozone layer. Why haven't we responded appropriately? I believe it is because we have failed to recognize a fundamental truth. We are animals. And as animals, we are completely embedded in and dependent on nature and natural law. Instead, we have constructed systems, legal, economic, and political, to guide, shape, and constrain human activity and behavior. Nature is the very basis of our existence and well-being. But the systems are built around us as supreme over the planet. We've moved from a web in which we are just one strand to a pyramid with us at the top. We create laws and boundaries. When fire broke out at Chernobyl, Swedish scientists announced a spike in radioactivity because air doesn't stay within national borders. Something Alberta Premier Danielle Smith doesn't understand, as she tells all non-Albertans what they do with fossil fuel development is nobody's business. 6 months after the Fukushima disaster, radioactivity and debris washed up on the BC coast because oceans flow where they must. Salmon, born in British Columbia streams, then travel through the Alaskan Panhandle along the Alaskan coast to Russia, Japan, and back. Whose fish are they? I actually agree with Mr. Trump on one thing when he says the border between Canada is an artificially drawn line, but especially the Alaskan Panhandle that cuts off half of BC's coastline. Borders have nothing to do with the integrity of watersheds, of ecosystems, or migratory routes. They are all about us. New Zealand, Ecuador, and Canada have now granted rights of personhood on rivers. We're all celebrating, aren't we great? As if somehow that elevates the importance of rivers. We've made them as important as us. But watersheds are not persons, and who the hell do we think we are that we're going to give rights to everything else? What about the right of a forest to exist as a community of organisms, or a bird or a mouse or a cockroach or mosquito to live as they have lived for millions of years? Our laws are all about humans from a human perspective, but nature has laws that we no longer feel bound to observe, and we've surpassed 7 of the 9 critical ones for our survival. The economy was created to evaluate work, and I am absolutely sure dominates your decisions on whether or not you develop things, whether you go ahead with this building, and how you develop the building. It's all about how much does the economy allow us. But the economy was created to evaluate, give value to human work, and to aid in transactions for human activity and products. But we built it on the creed of cancer, endless growth, which is impossible in a finite world. Right now, the richest country in the world is led by a crook who wants even more for himself and his super rich cronies, while the vast majority of people live at or below poverty. But we fail to ask the important questions. What is an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? Are we happier with economic growth? The economy is built around human productivity and human innovation, but nature is left out. Before he became a politician, Mark Carney wrote a book called Values. And in the first chapter of the book, he points out that Amazon, Jeff Bezos' giant company, is valued by the economy in the tens of billions. But Amazon, the greatest ecosystem on the planet, has no economic value until it's logged, mined, cut down, or grows soybeans, cattle, or cities. For 10 years, Canada's Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who is, I'm told, is very smart, dismissed acting on climate change because that is crazy economics. So he elevated the economy as more important than the atmosphere that gives us air to breathe, that gives us weather, climate, and the seasons. Harper is supposed to be smart. It is not acting to prevent climate change that is crazy. Politics is necessary to manage people in society, and in a democracy is determined by those who vote. In the US, corporations have been granted personhood, and so they have enormous lobbying power, even though they are not even people. Children, future generations, don't vote, yet they are the ones most affected by what governments do or do not do. For that matter, fish, air, trees, soil, they don't vote, which means the top priority of the Minister of Forests, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, the Minister of the Environment is not forests, fish, oceans, or the environment. They don't vote. It's people who want to use them in some way who vote and then become the minister's highest priority. Because once elected, every politician's highest priority is getting reelected, not protecting for generations to come or non-voting nature. We must learn to see the world as it really is. I know I'm eating into the panel time, but I'm sorry. I'm coming to the end, and I think it's important for you to hear. We have to see the world as it really is. A complex of sky, water, and land occupied by millions of species of plants, animals, and microorganisms, each doing their things to keep the planet habitable for all of us within a collective whole in which we are also a part. So we're like the cells in our lungs, the bone, the muscle, the blood, and so on, that act together, but together they make us. The planet is a living being of which we are a part. If we see the world this way, then we are filled first with gratitude and understand then the urgent need to stop our intrusions on what wild nature is left and to make the part of the earth that we have already occupied and despoiled make it available for wild nature to return. And that's the challenge I give you as architects. How do we make the structures that you are creating compatible with the planet and the skin of life that keeps us alive? That is why for over 40 years, my wife and I have been learning from and supporting Indigenous people around the world. As land defenders, they retain the understanding that we remain embedded in and utterly dependent on the natural world for our survival and well-being. And they retain a profound sense of responsibility to act in a good way to the land and all of its occupants. We settlers have so much to learn from them. Trump's election victory signaled the triumph of capitalism. And when you see the people he has gathered around him, clearly nature and the vast majority of people are of little concern to them. The environmental movement has failed to shift humanity off the destructive path driven by our laws, economy, and government. Nature is going to have to hammer us into paying attention to the increasingly urgent warnings that have come from scientists. I thought Hurricane Katrina, then Hurricane Andrew, then forest fires in British Columbia, and then Fort McMurray, and then Jasper, and then Los Angeles would be the tipping point, but they don't seem to have worked. Failure to galvanize action at an international level, 29 COP meetings on climate, 16 on biodiversity, or at the national level, we've elected Trump. Harper was our prime minister for 10 years. Poilievre has a good chance of getting in. Danielle Smith is already in. Means we have to focus on local communities as a unit of survival. And we have to look at all of the activities we are involved in our play as parents, in our work, all of our activities. We have to ask, is this helpful to Mother Earth? Thank you.
You drew up here. Well, Dr. Suzuki, you don't have to apologize for taking more time. I think there was literally no person in this room who wanted to do the question and answer more than hearing you continue to talk.
Thank you for that.
We're going, but we're going to have to do more than just hear you talk and us listen, even though we were all listening very closely. And I think in the next steps here for this evening, we're going to get some practice at expanding this discussion from just listening to thinking about action and with larger groups of people as well. So we've got two more steps. We're going to start the discussion a little bit small. We'll have a couple of questions to talk about here, and then we want to engage you in this conversation as well. And I think the point is very clear that we don't have time for to wait for action. And although I think we'd probably all like for the global community, for regulators at Broad to listen to what Dr. Suzuki is saying and decide to make a change happen, we're probably going to have to start acting more cohesively as a group.
Yes, I agree. You know, and my activity started in 1962 when Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. For many of you, this, you know, you've been involved getting your training and jobs and all that, and it may be very, very new to you, but this is the important thing. You've begun first by listening to me. I thank you so much for allowing that. But now the conversations we have to make, you know, this is all at the beginning. We're at the beginning of this conversation.
So maybe as a first point of the discussion here, in the building industry, we have, you know, the design and construction industries actually had a long history of engaging in sustainable design, and the panel here on the stage has an entire career of doing sustainable buildings. The problem is that those sustainable buildings were done in the mode of making them each a little less harmful, you know, with each step. And there are literally things that are not too distant. You know, 10 years ago, we were talking about the National Energy Code requiring individual buildings just on energy, maybe just 1 point of environmental impact, to be 25% less impactful than a building built several years before. Well, we've had decades of that kind of action, and we're really good at it, but it's not enough to just focus on buildings when such a large impact happens through our built environment. So I'd ask maybe each of you to propose something that we can move towards, if not acting as leaders, as architects, maybe helping others to make more transformational change, because that's really the kind of change that we need to make. That's what's being pointed at here. What do you think?
I think it's already.
Joanne, you have to go first.
I don't want to go first. That was just an amazing talk, Dr. Suzuki. Thank you. And I think that I think you actually said something that we really have to pay so close attention to, which is our communities. It needs to become a grassroots movement that really evolves, because a lot of, you know, municipalities and provincial governments rely on changes to the building code. They want somebody else to make the hard decisions and not them. And I think that everybody, like everybody here in this room, everybody here needs to actually say, that's enough. We have to do better. We will do better. So it really needs to come grassroots up and be very, very forceful, because we know it's not going to be coming from our politicians down.
Yeah, and I guess that what I would add is there's been lots of systems created globally, and you know, there's nature-based solutions discussed, and we need data, and we need to live within our planet's demands. But what ends up happening is we then turn that around into something where we're trying to outdo each other to do it better, or to get really fancy with it, to find the tricks, to not really work that hard at it. And I think that is our problem as a species, because if we really want to eat the chips and not eat the fresh fruit and vegetables, we figure out a way to trick ourselves into more consumption, things we don't need, but it seems to be, unfortunately, in our DNA.
Yeah, I think that one other thing to add to that, and especially with your word grassroots, is this kind of idea that one of the things we can look at that is could have a huge impact in it, is kind of removing petroleum products from our buildings and starting to look at grasses, local thatches, local materials, bio-based materials, and trying to really enhance those as we start to transform the buildings that we are making and making them more connected with the nature that's surrounding it. And as well, even looking into things like circular economy, where you can start to recycle materials that are in the buildings that are already here. So sufficiency, you know, making sure that we're not building more than we need, but also making those buildings that much more connected to the local communities. And that's a huge area that every one of us can actually start to do.
I wonder what you think about how to bring those conversations outside of the design and construction industry. I think like almost everyone in this room either is an architect or knows an architect, or is a building owner or knows a building owner. And that's such a the built environment is such a large portion of our environmental impact. We're talking here about decisions that can be made. We don't have to rely on codes and standards. There are things that we could do immediately. What are some ways that we could carry that discussion forward to the people that we work with? Maybe support them to make these decisions, or help us make those decisions.
Well, I would hope that people can just start to gather, start to have conversations, and then you know, one of the groups that you and I are involved with in Toronto, you know, I like some of the way that you've been organizing that, and you've actually brought on this kind of concept. Okay, it's fine enough to have a conversation at that time, but think about what your next steps are and start to expand the conversation further.
And I guess I would add, I mean, there is a concept, and it's talked a lot about, but not really, even within the built environment, but 7th generation thinking. Like, and when you think about even science-based targets, we come up with these systems, but it then becomes highly technical. We now are hyper-focused on clean tech to, solve a lot of issues, and a lot of clean tech, ironically, does emulate, the inventions emulate nature. And so I'll use carbon sequestered concrete, which emulates what decaying, Dr. Suzuki, correct me if I'm wrong, sea life does with a liquid, and liquid being salt water, and calcification into shells. And so it's that kind of thing that some of it we then go for a technical solution. We really have to look at the lessons from nature.
That's a really, really important thing that we've created over and over again. We create a problem, and then we find that we have to backtrack. And it's not just the current climate crisis. When DDT was found to kill arthropods, including insects, people said, "Oh, wow, this is great! We're going to control pests." And we knew enough then to say, "Hey, wait a minute! The most important group of animals on the planet are insects. If all humans disappeared today, the planet would green up and rebound and green itself. But if all insects disappeared overnight, terrestrial ecosystems around the world would collapse. They're a vital component of ecosystems. And yet, in order to kill one or two pests that are pests to us, mosquitoes or some kind of plant pest, we kill all the insects. We've declared war with insects. This is, to me, the most frightening loss of biodiversity that we've gone on. We've catastrophic loss of insects, and then we end up trying to revise, the actions that we've already had. When DDT began to be used, we gave the inventor a Nobel Prize in 1948. Then we discovered, oh my God, you spray in parts per million, but there's a thing we didn't know anything about called biomagnification. Microorganisms consume it, they don't die, they're eaten by bigger organisms. And when you get to the breasts of women or the shell glands of birds, you've concentrated DDT hundreds of thousands of times. So then we have to find, how do we reverse the thing? But we should have done, we could have identified the problem before we started using it in a big way. And over again, we do that. The ozone layer was threatened, and only then we had to find alternatives to CFCs. When atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, we didn't know there was a thing called radioactive fallout. And you think of all the drugs, thalidomide and DES and all kinds of drugs that have been used. And then, oh my God, we find there's an impact. So if we don't begin with biomimicry, we have to start by saying, nature's had 3.9 billion years to evolve solutions to the same things. How do you keep from being eaten? How do you find food? How do you move around? If we were more humble and said, gee, how did they do it in terms of my activity? I think you'd find some amazing answers that would make a lot more sense. One of the major problems we're facing right now is that human time doesn't work with nature's time. So, we've survived the planet has survived 5 mega extinction crises, and life has rebounded. But it took 10 million years to come back. So people run around now saying, save the Earth, the planet's in trouble. No, the Earth isn't in trouble. The Earth did fine for 4 billion years before we arrived. And the Earth would do fine long after we're gone. And we will be gone. It's just that we've ensured we're trying to do everything within human time, and Earth won't take that. It's too fast. So
I feel.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I did
I
want
was
to
just going to say, I think
one thing. It's got to
go.
start on our expectations. That determined you guys are all about building and building more. In the last 40 years, the average size of a Canadian family has been by 50%. In that same period, the average size of a Canadian house has doubled. What the hell's going on? We need 4 times as much space per person. I grew up in London, Ontario after the war. Family of 6, less than 1,000 square feet with 1 bathroom. The average home today is built with 1 bathroom per occupant. I don't ever remember peeing my pants because my 3 sisters wouldn't let me in the bathroom. What the hell are we doing here now? You know, and so much of your activity is about showing off how clever we are with all. Stop it. Let nature show us, and then show off when you've followed nature and said, look at us, look at we're doing just when. Anyway.
I have a funny story.
Go ahead.
Just years ago, and was working with a landscape architect, and she had said, you know, we're going to get rid of this swamp. And I said, swamp? That's a wetlands. Like, what are you talking about? She said, no, it's a swamp. And I said, it's a wetland. If you ever want to work with me again, it is a wetland and it will stay. So
good point.
Good point. I haven't made that much progress, but at any rate, we're trying.
Yeah, it's this.
But I do think,
the scale of everything is really the problem now. I asked E.O. Wilson, who's probably the greatest well-known ecologist in the world. He's dead now, but he at Harvard. And I asked him, Ed, how many humans do you think the planet could sustain? And he said, I don't know. But if you want to live like Americans, if you want everybody to live, maybe 200 million. We're at 8 billion. And according to the UN, we're going to hit 10. And we've got just material crisis. Ron Milo, the Israeli scientist, has estimated the weight of everything humans make. That's from newspapers to all of our buildings and our machines, everything. That the weight of all human constructed artifacts is greater than the weight of all living protoplasm on the planet today. That's all the trees and the whales and that's just the structures that we've made. All of that has come from the earth. You know, there's a huge building boom going on in Vancouver. As I look out, you know, this is all about greater densification. But all of the sand for the concrete is coming from, there's a sand shortage. It's being mined off beaches of Hawaii and California. That, you know, just the material use in everything that we do is overwhelming.
I'm really struggling with my mandate to keep everything on track because I just think that this is way more important than anything else we're going to be doing later tonight. I'm also making a list of simple questions that we might, out in the lobby, there's going to be a tattoo artist later, and we're going to like give everyone a tattoo that says stuff like, what would nature do? Like right on your arm, so you can see it all the time. And do you need this space? Like these should be questions, like it should just start with that. Now, we said that we wanted to keep enlarging this discussion, and there's time for you to ask some questions as well, maybe following along with some of these themes about how do we move to the next step to engage more people and to act, maybe not waiting for regulations. If you've got a question in the audience, just put up your hand, and someone's got, oh, there's one down here at the front, and a microphone is going to come to you really quickly. If not from the back, it's going to come from John. Here we go. John's faster, but you stay over there because I know there are more questions over here. Thank you. Okay, go for it.
Okay, so I guess I'll be the first one. It seems to me that secret, the first step is to teach everyone humility, humbleness. Because it seems like that's the way that we're going to open up our eyes and pay attention and maybe learn a few lessons. So maybe David could start us off How do we teach humility?
That's a hard one. I mean, I think right now it is our supremacy that we accept. That's why, scientists have said this is the Anthropocene epoch, the age of man or humans, when we are the dominant geological force on the planet. I think that you have to begin with love, and that's the love of your children. You don't If you don't love your children, I mean, that's what it's all about. And I've had adults come to me saying, you're scaring everybody. My son is really depressed. And I say, well, I can understand it, to me, our only hope is action. If you act to make a difference, if you act to make a change, then it indicates you believe a different future is possible. If you say, oh, it's too late, to me, there's no hope. And I say to young people, the most important people in your life are mom and dad. If they care and love you, they've got to be warriors on your behalf. If not, then I think children have every right to despair. So love
That
your
strikes
children.
me as a conversation you could have at the beginning of every design meeting is to start with talking about children and the next step and what your client is going to do as to be a warrior and how we can help them, perhaps. There's another question over here. Thank you for that question.
Hello, thank you. So my question's kind of around building materials, because there's so many different types of really neat things that are coming out. But how do we explain to the new generation that is building or thinking about building that, these materials are going to last them? There's, a worry, I think, for most that the building materials that we use may not last as long as the traditional building materials that we're currently using. But we also want to be environmentally friendly. So how do we balance both of those,
Well,
do you
I think
think?
it's a problem because our demand is already more than the planet can take. 'Cause, I've watched my grandson's old school being torn down, and it takes an enormous amount of energy to break apart the structures once they're made. But I just saw no attempt to save. It's an old school, but no attempt to save every bit of the glass that's already framed, and all of the wood can be torn apart and much of it used, and because it's so old, much of it is probably better quality than the wood you could buy today, and yet there's been no investment in the time. And even with the concrete, I see that they've recovered a lot of the rebar, but the energy that went into that, and I'm wondering what happens with the blocks of concrete that remain. I don't know how much of that is recycled, but that has to be a part of what we do. But the fact is that we are demanding too much. It's as simple as that. And during the COVID crisis, one of the things we found is Surrey, which is a suburb of Vancouver and is now bigger in population than Vancouver itself. They discovered there were a lot of COVID cases were coming out in Surrey. And why was that? Well, it turns out that the elderly are most vulnerable to COVID. And guess what? They were living communally with family. The majority of people living in Surrey are Indians, and Indians have multi-generational living together, and so they were the ones that were feeling the impact of COVID hitting the elder. We have to learn to live that way and go back to yeah. We have to restructure the whole way that we're living. We have to reduce our demand on the planet. And in your area, that's a big challenge.
thinking long term, and also thinking to how did we do it before with materials that we know last for a long period of time? Those two things probably come together, right? We have some answers.
My brother-in-law did his postdoctoral study at Oxford and in England, and when we went to visit him, he was living in a house that had been built 350 years ago. It was very cold. It was almost all stone. But I mean, people lived in, very different ways. And I think we've got a lot to learn from the past too.
Let's risk one more question on timing. You're down at the front. One second. We got it. Thank you.
When you're building a net zero building, do you factor in all the energy costs of the materials? So what the energy is of the solar panels to get them built, the labor and stuff that goes in them. So even if a building is net zero, that it almost has to be negative in order to compensate for all the materials that went into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is
Oh,
something.
I was going to pass this one off to John, actually, because he's got a better handle. It all has to do with a lot of life cycle assessment that you do. And I do not believe it accounts for all of the externalities yet. It began quite simply with looking at structure and some of the basic building materials, and it is evolving to get more sophisticated and complicated. But it takes a lot of time and effort to do that as well. And so I wouldn't say we have any perfect solution for that yet, but please add on to that.
Well, I was going to raise the fact that we talk about natural materials, and we now have created over decades, if not centuries, a lot of unnatural materials that we need to figure out how to deal with that and not become trash. So another great Canadian current innovation is called Samsara Materials. And they have figured out how to take hard and soft plastic waste and use it in lieu of cement in concrete. And what is interesting too is who pays to get plastic waste removed that we all then pay for in airfare and airport food. Let's leave air travel alone for a minute. What's interesting now, they're looking to build facilities at airports so that airports don't pay to get rid of their waste, and instead it actually gets permanently embedded without leaching. So far, all tests, Taiwanese patents, Canadian patents, and all testing in Taiwan and Canada, that then we can now not use mined cement and instead use the garbage we created. So I mean, some of those kind of solutions. So I'm thinking, nature-based solutions, natural materials, but also all the shit that we created, the unnatural stuff, how we could actually figure out how we could maybe start to tackle some of those things. I think we need a lot of thinking there.
If I were just going to add on to the original question, it was related to the accounting aspects that we're kind of dealing with. And I think that we've been slowly changing the way we take into account all of these materials and energies that we're putting into our buildings. And I think to Dr. Suzuki's point, we don't have any more time to change our accounting. Like, it's been such a slow uptick. We have to actually think bigger, bolder, and we have to change everything now.
We're going to continue for the rest of the evening to talk in the other room with drinks. Dr. Suzuki, you're not going to be able to join us here, but you get the final word for us for this discussion. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with?
I'm motivated by a sense of urgency, the urgency being that I'm old. I've always said I'm in the death zone, and I'm not saying that as any kind of morbid statement. It's just a fact. And, I'm motivated so much by the thought of my grandchildren and the kind of world that I know they're heading towards. But for all of you, you've done, to me, from my standpoint, the most important thing is you've granted me the privilege of speaking to you, and you've listened to me for this whole time. And now, I think for most, this is a pretty shocking way to rethink our lives. And it's going to take time. We're not going to find solutions right away, but it's the conversation, and we can begin to make small changes. Net zero is just a cover for a lot of stuff. Yeah. So we can set these targets, but it's going to take a long time for us to change a lot of our habits. And I think we've started the conversation, and I thank you for that. And this has just got to be the very beginning of your thinking. You know, I remember going to the first green building conference in Austin, Texas, in the first 2001, first green building. And there were 3,000 people in the audience, a lot of them children. And when I gave the keynote speech at the end of my talk, I said, now, I hope all of you will, I said to the kids, I hope you remember one thing from my talk, and that is we're animals. And I thought I'd get a round of applause, and instead they were pissed off. Not the children, the adults. This woman came up to me and said, "Don't you call my daughter an animal. She's a human being." I said, "Gee, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm a biologist. If she's not an animal, is she a plant?" We've got to just remember what we are, and then love your children and grandchildren, and then we've got to rethink everything, you know, from ourselves and the way we're living. Lots of people come up to me and say, you know, Suzuki, I think you're right, but you know, what can I do as one? I'm a drop in the bucket. I say there are two things. Today I say two things. You're going to vote. You're going to vote, and damn well take this into consideration when you vote. Not that it's going to make much difference right now, but I think there is, as in the American federal election, there was a fundamental difference between those two candidates. You have a fundamental difference now between the two major candidates. Very, very different. And so your vote, but the other thing we can do as individuals, stop consuming so much. I challenge environmentalists, cut your consumption by 50%. People go, holy cow, what are you talking about? 70% of the North American economy now is built on consumption. But do you think it's consumption of things that we need? Go into a Walmart's and wonder, how much of this do I really need? And I think we could cut. There's a great group in England called Jump, saying, okay, if you want to make a difference as an individual, and they look at food and clothing and transportation, and they say, buy 3 new articles of clothing a year. Some people seem to think that's an outrageous target. I've got more stuff now than I will need in a lifetime. I don't have to buy a single thing. But that's one of their recommendations. My great sin is travel. I have flown a lot for the nature of things. And they say if you want to go by air and you want to make a short haul flight, that would be Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Vancouver to Calgary, one flight every 3 years. If you want to fly long haul, Vancouver to Toronto, Toronto to London, England, once every 7 years. So that's the kind of challenge, though, when you think about your own life. And I think you have to begin there. Think about your children and the kind of world they're getting. The big one for me, I'll tell you, that we all have to face is this hidden giant, which is microplastics. Every one of us is filled with plastics and pieces that you can't see with the naked eye. It's found at the top of Mount Everest. It's found at the North and South Poles. They're found in every human that's been autopsied for microplastics has microplastics. It's in our testicles. It's in our ovaries. It's in our brains. It's in our fetuses. That's the big one. And I'm not sure that it's so great, you know, to hide away our plastics in concrete. Maybe that's one way of getting rid of what we've already produced. But it seems to me the big thing is stop making more. This is the big thing. We've got to stop excusing our way. You know, we have to leave our fossil fuels in the soil, in the ground. Have you ever heard one politician say that? you know, these are big, big changes.
Well, you've given us lots to think about, and I think as a group, we're going to
Thank you.
continue this conversation. Dr. Suzuki, thank you very much for this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, next, there are a couple last announcements to make, and we're going to turn the stage
Can't
over.
run out yet.
That's right, not yet. We're going to turn the stage over to Joanne McCallum to make 2 announcements, and then we can run out.
I promise to be short. I have to say, Dr. Suzuki made it very easy to be on a panel because, like, we don't actually have to talk. It's awesome. It's awesome. So what I'm going to do now is we started something a couple of years ago, and I'm very honored about this. It's called the Joanne McCallum Sustainability Catalyst Award. And so we first initiated it a couple of years ago, and it's a biannual award that recognizes outstanding achievement by an individual in the office that reflects and advances the firm's mission and vision. Our mission, if you don't know, is innovators in sustainable design and collaborative construction. And our vision is built environments that respect our Earth. The award is meant to stimulate and excite everyone in the firm to create stretch goals for themselves, to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and think innovatively, to grow personally and professionally in meeting and exceeding sustainability initiatives. Sharing that knowledge with our peers amplifies our opportunities to drive our mission and vision forward with meaning and intent. The 2025 recipient is an outstanding individual who not only walks the talk, but is creating new markets for mcCallumSather, working with municipal and regional clients in the realm of decarbonization. Additionally, our recipient has fearlessly led the change in creating highly energy efficient environments in complex building typologies, and has never ceased to share and mentor the lessons learned. Now, it's fair to say that I have never avoided a robust discussion and to challenge our teams to push for sustainable design solutions and maximize opportunities. It is equally fair to say that the individual receiving the award tonight has never backed off a challenging debate, but rather has engaged in the conversation with great intelligence and passion. Once the dust is settled, there is a collective agreement on defining optimum and synergistic solutions. I think some of you in the audience may know by now who the recipient is, our remarkable principal who leads our mechanical team, Mary Georges.
Okay.
Now, that's as close as you're going to get to Mary tonight, because unfortunately she could not be here. So I have asked Adam McCaughan, who is the recipient of the award, the first award that we did, to come up and receive it on behalf of Mary.
Joanne,
Yes.
you said you were going to turn around in a circle before you did
Oh,
your
I was.
closing review. Okay, so right now,
It sounds like a pirouette.
I'm
Okay.
just going to pause you for one moment
Okay.
because there's another thing that we have to do.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
Yeah, give us a sec.
Did you want me to turn around
Yeah,
again?
you can keep
Okay,
spinning.
so let
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
while you're doing whatever, I'm just going to tell you something that people in the firm know, that there's one thing I do that Dr. Suzuki mentioned. I have never bought 3 articles of clothing in a year. In fact, I don't think I bought 3 articles in the last 5 years. So they want me to retire because they're sick of looking at what I wear. Okay, so
Drew's going to need your microphone.
I did not prepare a speech. So this is a print from Trevor Ewart. And of course, Trevor would make these prints of trees that had come down or been cut down, just kind of as a thumbprint or a fingerprint of capturing this before it's gone forever. In this case, though, the bark all around the tree, everyone in the firm signed this. So when you get up close, we just wanted to be a part of that gift for you and what you've given back to us.
They're really trying to make me cry. Okay, so these are my few closing remarks. And it's time to socialize after this and have some drinks catered by the other bird. I don't know if Erin is here yet tonight. I know she was coming at some point, but Erin and her team, who by the way are opening a new venture very soon called Henry's on James. So it promises to be a unique venue in Hamilton showcasing food, cocktails, and you know, I'm sure you're going to enjoy the jazz that's going to be played there as well. So a new venture here for Hamilton. So there's my plug for the other bird. And they're catering tonight, right? So Dr. Suzuki calls for action. We all have to act, and this Earth Day event is meant to be a continuing event going forward to share with as broad an audience as possible where we are on our sustainability journey and gain a deeper understanding of the relationship we all share with our precious planet. We are all on this journey together. I'm deeply indebted to the staff who made this first event so meaningful and memorable. And that's with Asia and Alicia doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So give them a round of applause. They've done a terrific job. But they've also had the support of all the firm directors, principals, associates, and staff. And this is what makes mcCallumSather so special. So for everybody, thank you. Now, you might be wondering a little bit about who our moderators are. You know, I was standing out on a street with a sign and said, would you come in? And anyway. So Alex Lukashko, whom I have known personally for many years and have never failed to be impressed with his knowledge, passion, commitment, and ability to articulate his thoughts so fluently. I have learned so much from Alex, who has always been willing to take a call from me when I needed some sage advice. Alex has a special expertise in building science, building envelopes, and all things sustainable. And as he mentioned at the outset, he is currently teaching at U of T in the Daniels faculty. So thank you very much, Alex. You did an amazing job. To Lisa Bay. This is good. Architect and sustainable design guru extraordinaire. We met in the early 2000s when we were both on the OEA Council together, and we've been hanging out together ever since. We share a passion for sustainable design, and she leveraged her enthusiasm and boundless energy into a global reach. As chair of the Canadian Green Building Council, chair of the World Green Building Council, and as global sustainable lead for B&H Architects. Relative to Lisa, I consider myself to be the bag lady. Anytime we landed a project together, Lisa would traipse off to Beijing or Vietnam and leaving me holding the bag. Thank you, Lisa. You gave me some of the fastest learning curves that I've ever had to deal with in my professional career, and I'm a better person for it. You can tell tonight from her on the panel just how much she knows. It's just, you know, I'm humbled. I'm always humbled. John Peterson, an extremely accomplished architect who has connections with just about every person or company engaged in delivering highly sustainable buildings. It never ceases to amaze me when I ask John if he knows so-and-so. He inevitably says, "Yo, yes," and then goes on to describe that person or company in detail. John has also worked on some of Canada's most distinguished design firms on nationally and internationally recognized projects. And we are so pleased to have John join our firm as senior architect, driving sustainability and innovation and working with all of our staff in Hamilton, Kitchener, and Toronto. So thank you, John. Only half a page left. And then it's, time to be social. Some of it's in smaller type, though. I am really looking forward to focusing my energy on some of my personal initiatives that have sustainability at the heart, but it embraces the broader worldview. My particular focus is water, so I'll see where that takes me. Hopefully, some of it will be time on our sailboat. Our senior leadership team, most of whom are here tonight, Drew, Michelle, Heather, Matt, Mike, and the firm principals, Kevin, Liam, Willems, Will, don't get Willems and Will mixed up, Laura, Mary, and David are a remarkable team, driving the firm forward to new initiatives. Transition is never easy, but this group have put their all into refining an empowered leadership team that prepared to meet the challenges of the next decade. And I would also like to thank my family, David and Sarah, as well as my sisters, Mary Helen, Carol, and Heather, who have been one way or another on this journey with me. I'd also like to thank Greg Sather, who is here right in the front row. Who was a founding principal with me, mcCallumSather, who bought in to the vision in 1995. So, has now retired. Thank you. Thank you. We had many moments over the years. So I've had a remarkable career, and I am filled with gratitude for those who believed in our mission and vision and helped to build the firm what it is today, a nationally and internationally recognized firm that can deliver complex building typologies reflecting highly sustainable design solutions, meeting or exceeding net zero energy and carbon targets, low intensity site development, and an increasing involvement with our Indigenous partners, consultants, and clients who bring so much natural intelligence, thoughtfulness, and care to the work we do. So thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope you can take away something of importance from this evening that might cause you to shift your perspective about the challenges we face, and know that our profession, architects, engineers, builders, have the knowledge, the skills, the processes, and passion to help you build environments that respect our Earth. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Nicely done.